Welcome back to Incremental, the Continuous Improvement Podcast. This is our practice edition where we will talk about improvements we made throughout the week and the lean concepts behind them, and just trying to give sort of a real world view into what it looks like to try to implement lean in a business, and the struggles along the way, the wins, the confusion, and yeah.
All the things.
All the things. Got a quote?
Yes. Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. Abraham Lincoln.
I feel like there's a lot of quotes to that effect.
There are. Yeah. It's maybe a little predictable for us, but the point stands. Kind of goes back to the Toyota engineering, methodology. In general, like doing work on the process rather than the operation, like it's easy to be like, I just need to chop down this tree. I better start chopping.
Right.
Versus being like, what's the best way to chop down this tree? I guess a sharp axe is probably a good way to start.
Yeah. Agreed. I think we have, like the team, have room for improvement on making sure we give ourselves that time to think and plan.
Yeah.
I have a great example to jump right in from our weekly improvements. I have 2 entries, one above the other. One is moved the shipping area for better flow and less movement. So we, as I mentioned last episode, built a new table and put the table closer to the assembly area. And then we quickly discovered, after we had put in all that work of doing it, we quickly discovered we actually don't need the shipping table at all. And so integrated it into the assembly area. I think all of that probably could have been avoided by doing a what's it called?
A3.
An A3, right? But it's so hard to ask, why
the correct
do
question
we need
is the hard part.
Station? And I suspect a good A3 process could have avoided a lot of work there. So I guess if Abraham Lincoln was around, he maybe would have
A3'd it.
A3'd it. That's what we can get from this quote. Anyway.
Yeah.
So that was
if I need to chop down a tree, I will start with a sheet
an
of paper.
Yeah.
Cool. All my improvements this week were grouped around our spectacular gripper failure.
Oh, cool. Yeah. You want to just bang through that?
Yeah. So
bang through mine.
As I mentioned, had a gripper failure. In an attempt to learn from our failures, and because they are jewels. I updated our generic gripper tray model with a hole for the screw.
Okay.
I also, this was actually prior, I updated the generic model with a cutout for which direction is Y positive in the machine.
For installation?
For installation.
Oh, nice.
Because sometimes they get, I often chop them down quite a bit so there's not a bunch of extra plastic that we're printing. And they can sometimes get chopped down to a point where the 2 pinholes, if it's full size, the 2 alignment pinholes are biased and it's really obvious. It can't go in the wrong way.
Yeah.
But once it gets chopped down to a certain size, it can be almost symmetrical. So I put in a little Y positive cutout in the middle of it. So it's just, even if you weren't reading what the letters said, just the fact that they're in the orientation that you can read them is almost enough of an alignment tool.
Yeah. Is there a situation where you could add a little boss on the, probably not, and make it poke-okay? Where you literally couldn't install it the wrong way?
I'm sure there is. Yeah. It would require some modification to the base tray, but that's a small thing. Probably worthwhile.
And just maybe, just to add some doubt to any degree of certainty around the Toyota production system, I read somewhere that, I forget which book, that sometimes at Toyota they don't make things poke-okay because they want their operators to
be paying attention.
So
yeah,
whichever way
I think this definitely goes into the poka-yoke category. Like, it's not something you do every day. It's not something you can get routine. It's something that happens rarely enough, at least right now, where it's more likely that you will just forget and do it wrong. And so I think that's the ideal poka-yoke scenario.
I still wonder. I'm sure they have thought a lot about when you should do what.
Yeah.
Because, there's consequences to hitting
both.
go.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Cool.
We were running a part that we'd done with the gripper before, and we're having massive issues with part ejection from the jaw, from the vise after they were done. And part of it is we're doing this like blowout routine instead of picking the part back out with the gripper.
Yep.
We just flip the trunnion and blow it out with air. This particular issue is mostly due to big burrs being formed. So
in the mill or in the lathe?
In the mill, in the part.
Okay.
Is like a counter bore in a curved surface. It's like kind of a perfect scenario for a big burr to get formed on like the back edge.
Okay.
As modeled sharp, chamfering it, like kind of ruined the part visually. Like a traditional chamfer. Couldn't really do a trace chamfer, so I was like trying to deal with it just within the routine, the dump routine. So anyway, I made a bunch of updates to the generic like routine for dumping, where instead of just like flipping over and opening and blowing the air, now it like flips over, opens the vise at a specific time, does 2 like air blast spurts. So there's like, because I've often found if you just blast with air, sometimes it just pushes it against the far wall and like literally will hold it there.
So this sort of jostles it?
Yeah, this jostles it, and then it does a shimmy. Like
the vise?
The whole rotary trunnion does a shimmy back and forth at rapid, and then another air blast before flipping over. So it's definitely a little bit of a time consequence, and maybe we'll cut it out if it's not necessary for some parts, but it was, I think, a good move. And it's like where we're at with this whole automation thing, we're not chasing cycle time. I
was going to say, I think to chase cycle time, you'd have to add a line to your like costing, like quoting spreadsheet of like likelihood of error and how long that error will take to recover from. Because I feel like it's so easy to ignore the 3 people stood around a machine, and it actually took about 20 minutes before anyone started doing anything else. Yeah. And then one person worked on it for an hour and a half, and then we were back up and running, and somehow that feels like an exception. Yeah. It's like, oh, this mistake happened. Weird. Okay.
Yeah.
We're back.
When you start kind of running the numbers on how much time you can dedicate to a setup and a proof out, like you have to be running a lot of parts before it's worthwhile to really dedicate time to refinement. Yeah.
Interesting.
Like, I think like overall refinement is good, like refining your process from part to part. Right. Like, I don't think you should just be stagnant, but getting really into the weeds with optimization on an individual part, at least in my work where we're on like a, 10 to 200 quantity. Yeah. Like, you better have that thing up and running in like an hour, or you're probably underwater. On at least on your setup side, and you're not going to make that back probably. Right. So and then I talked about it, this is not related, but I made added a tool break detect to that repeat part because it didn't have it before. Okay. And we scrapped a bunch of parts because they were not loading correctly. Broke a drill, I think, because the part went in sideways. Gotcha.
So the tool break detect would have caught that.
Yeah. It was funny, too, because I was like, I'm just going to let this run. And I left the shop. We were like, went home. My shop's at my in-laws' house, so we were like going to come back for dinner. I'm just going to let this run and come back. I like walked in and was like, it's still going. Feeling so good, making money while we have dinner. And then I came in the next morning and I actually unloaded the parts. And I was like, half of these are awful. And now I have to remake my jaws. And I broke a $70 drill or something. And then last improvement was that macro program that does the back boring.
Oh, cool.
Yet untested still. But
right.
I think that's going to be a big win.
That is not optimization for, I mean, it is optimization for that part, but is sort of building capability in the shop.
It's building capability in the shop. It is, so that is planned for a family of parts that will be all things, knock on wood.
Yeah.
God willing, will be a repeat ongoing job.
And I guess optimization would be misleading because you physically, like, you need a way to make that feature and you didn't have one.
Yeah, it was like a choice of two options, an expensive off-the-shelf option or an in-house option. So
yeah, it wasn't like this is happening and it takes a minute and I think I can do it in 54 seconds instead.
No. Yeah. It was like I sent them the part. They were like,
it's missing this.
What about this? I was like, it said on the print, you don't have to do that if necessary. And they were like, well, our other vendor's doing it. I was like, okay.
It's weird that it's on their print.
Yeah, it sounds like the company's had like a bunch of rollover in like engineering staff and procurement staff and like
gotcha.
Maybe some like
I will say deals. It's understandable.
Yes. Yeah.
There's so many things to do in a small business.
Yeah.
Cool. I have some very simple ones. Added a piece of tape to the paint booth filter support. So there's this metal like wire grid that holds the filter in the paint booth. And every time when you change it, you take that grid out, you unload the filter, you put a new filter onto it, and then you load it back in.
This is filtering outgoing air?
This is filtering paint particles out of the air that's being sucked out of the shop. So it doesn't like paint the side of the building.
Yeah.
And so every time that filter unfortunately can't go in either way, like 90 degrees. Horizontally or vertically.
Yeah.
And so every time I would try to load it in and it was like, not this way.
Wrong way.
This way.
A USB problem.
Yes. And so I finally added a little tab of tape to the top of it. But I think, this is probably like whatever wasted motion, wasted human potential, over processing, whatever. The real thing is, I think there's a lot of orientation, ambiguous orientation problems in our life. I have one with my laptop where sometimes I try to open it from the wrong side. And it's like, oh, nope, the hinge is on this side. I have to flip it all around because there's no visual that shows you. And so I just thought it was an interesting thing to flag of like, where in your life or shop or whatever do you need to try things one way than the other? It's so funny that doesn't feel like it gets logged in my brain as a failure every time. There's a book called The Design of Everyday Things. The front of the book is a teapot with the spout going the wrong way, like it's angled down instead of up. Anyway, the premise of the book is essentially like we attribute, like it's embarrassing when you try to open a door wrong, but actually that's just bad design because it should be it should be intuitive how to open a door.
Yeah.
Right, like when it has a handle on it, like a big loop handle, but it's a push door. And then you feel like a dummy for like pulling it. And it's like, no, it's bad design. Anyway, it's funny that it doesn't get logged in my head immediately as like, I just tried this one way and it didn't work.
Yeah.
Can I fix that?
Yeah.
So fix it, people. No. Yeah, and I thought of different approaches. I just did a tag of tape. It's not perfect, but it's a good improvement. I hit we moved our shipping area, so that was a big win. It's going to be an ongoing process to refine it. Like it's such a big process shift that like all the muscle memory from the old system is sort of out the window. And so it sort of it's interesting. It makes it hard to measure whether it was a win. Yeah. I'm pretty sure in the long run it is. Like 99% sure. Yeah. In that it's going to make us notice new problems that we can solve and also just uses a lot less space in a very tight shop. Less movement, all that stuff. So it's a big win, but it was interesting from a metrics perspective of having a baseline, like this is how long it takes. Yeah. And then afterward, you're like, unclear if it's faster, but I think it will once we get that muscle memory back.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, we have to tackle shipping for sure at the new space. Like right now, our shipping station is, I would say, highly compromised just due to space. Yeah. And we often have, not like huge parts, but decent sized parts. You're like, where do you set this? But I also don't want to have the shipping station just like balloon. Like I want it to be efficient and small.
Yeah, I think
how do we
there's
handle that?
something to be said for designing around 80%. Like design for 80% of the stuff you handle.
Yeah.
And optimize for that. And then those other weird, exceptional, like large stuff, weird stuff is like, it's annoying.
Yeah.
But at least you're not just,
You need to have some solution that isn't someone kneeling on the floor.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't have to be you don't have to optimize for that.
Yeah. Like it's okay if, Anyway, that's my thought, but I don't know. We had in redoing the shipping area, we had to unplug the laser, and it was unclear which. Like we were just looking at this plug in the wall, and we're like, "What is that?" And we had to sort of trace it back, and so I just took that moment to pull out the label maker and label the end of that cord. So now it says laser. Or something like that. So I wanted to share that because I feel like it's very easy to just push through those, but over time the result is that the shop is very easy to operate in.
Yeah.
When anything you walk up to tells you what's plugged in here, all these things. So that was quick, easy. Okay, this is a funny one. Mag strip for miscellaneous tools. So I hung up in the paint area. We had a whole bunch of like pliers and weird things like just on the floor. And every time I went to do something with them, our shop is super tight. So there was like no counter, whatever. There was
like in a box or just scattered on the floor?
Like sort of tucked into a corner, if you will. I've been there for a while.
Ye old corner tuck.
Exactly. And so I finally just hung a mag strip and stuck them up on the wall, but it's in a production area. They are not like one or two of them are tools we use in that area. The others are not really. So it feels like a step in the right direction, namely that they're not on the floor,
right? But
also they shouldn't be there at all.
So not
anyway,
really
just sharing, the
confusion,
the ugly side of things. So we'll see how that all progresses. I think there's a lot to be said for getting everything that's not production related out of the shop. And it's really not where I came from, in that I ran a prototyping shop, and there was always a view of like more capabilities are better. So like instead of having one pair of pliers, what if we have all the types of pliers?
Right.
Which is probably not good in a prototyping shop either.
No.
It's before I got into all this stuff.
You do have to count. Like I've struggled with this a lot with like, where do we put our wrenches? Right?
Yeah.
Like you need wrenches.
From time to time.
You
and
do.
Then it's hard to do anything without them.
Yeah. When you need a wrench, you need a wrench.
Yeah.
They're not part of the production process. Right. At least not really. And so I've struggled with where that kind of stuff lives, because it needs to be in the shop. Like from your like shelf making example, like if you had to like literally go next door to get the stuff you needed to build that shelf, like that would start to be a problem.
Right.
It's an interesting.
Yeah, I'm excited when for you to move into this new space to start hearing about, like, to get some perspective collectively on this podcast on like. Both of us are wedged into absurdly small shops, I would say. Yeah. And it's cool from a efficiency standpoint in some ways, but I'm interested. I feel like you're going to be like, so here's what we're learning. So I'm excited for that. I modeled a new Mighty Byte insert in Fusion and added it to our library of fixturing assets that we can pull into models. Instead of just what I was doing before, which was like taking the old insert and just like expanding the pocket. I modeled the negative pocket so that when you drag them into a thing, you can just do the body combine function to like delete the proper hole with the corners drilled out instead of like sharp internal corners, to make that a little more efficient. So I basically like just came up with a really hacky way of making it bigger to accommodate the other insert. Instead, I went ahead and modeled it.
Gotcha.
I don't know. More interestingly, this is sort of a question I had for you. I have a part that I've now, all of our Op1 machining, like when we take a block of aluminum and put it in the vise, it is always centered on the centering vise.
Yeah.
I just made a part where it is way off center. There's no
purposefully. Like, I mean, obviously it was purposeful, but like for a good reason.
Well, so this is the question. It's non-standard, and so now I'm gonna have to reprogram all of the place, like the pick and place for the gripper, which isn't gonna be hard, but is a thing.
Yeah.
And so it's non-standard. The reason to do it is to get clearance for a chamfer mill on our op2, which is sunk in the soft jaws between those hardened inserts. And I wanted to get it really sunk down in there to grab.
Right.
So I'm learning the downside of a taller insert is you have to, tool clearance becomes more of an issue.
Yeah.
Anyway,
also,
what do you
downside
think
of having one vise?
That's the big thing. I am dreaming of a second vise.
Don't think you should optimize around one vise.
I think
you should optimize. It's time. I think you should optimize around gripping on or working off center. Yeah, I think to me in the automation realm, that's sort of a don't break the rule thing. I've done it a couple times
and regretted it.
Actually, no. I think I still worked on center, but I did like a pyramid style where it's like different A rotations.
Okay.
But the pick and place was still on center.
Oh, interesting.
So that's something you could explore. So instead of just being like A0 on center both times, it was like it was like A30 for op 1, A-30 for op 2, but still picking and placing on center line so that the routines didn't have to change too much.
I could imagine doing that. And hearing you talk about, I was just thinking 1 and 2 vices. 2 vices means double the screws for a changeover. Do we care?
No, do not.
You don't think so? If you can do it in one.
Also, you can probably reuse a lot of your op 1 jaws for multiple parts.
Yeah, but now are we scheduling to attempt to do that, or do you not bother?
I think you don't bother.
Or do you make jaws that are single touch to switch between stock sizes? That would be nice.
That would be the eventual. I think for right now you do 4 extra screws. I think the long-term benefits of 2 vices seem very high.
Yeah, of course it would be tempting, don't tell anyone I said this. It would be tempting to do 2 of the same part with op 1 and op 2 in each vise for tool changes. But I won't do that, maybe.
You can have 2 workflows.
That's true.
For parts that...
Just to non-standardize even more.
Well, no, you'd have 2 standard workflows.
Right now I have 1 standard workflow for each part we make.
I lost some serious lean cred. Yeah, we ran
really airing the dirty laundry here.
Yeah, we ran way too many of a part. And I had to email the customer and be like, "I'm losing my cred here, but do you want any extra?"
What did they say?
They did, actually. It was a replacement for a part that were having failed threads because of a material type.
Oh, interesting.
So they were ordering, and they came in pairs. So they were ordering pairs. We happened to make more of the threaded side by accident. So I thought they might appreciate a few extra since they were having to replace existing ones.
Interesting. I've had questions around that. I don't know if more people do this, but it seems like as you try to get to just in time, assuming you have defects, which is obviously something we're trying to eliminate, then you end up overproducing slightly to account for the possibility of rejects. Or the other option is to not overproduce at all, and then if you have rejects, run some replacement through the system.
Yeah.
For us making, if someone orders 300 straps in a custom color, and we paint 300, and then it turns out 2 of those are rejects. Now we have to make a batch of 2 in that color is pretty annoying. So I'm tempted, and I don't know if anyone has feedback on this, if they've seen it done or if this makes sense or makes no sense, but just kind of or what you think.
Yeah.
Just being like, I don't know if you put it in your PO, but it's like, hey, we're ordering 300 plus, plus maybe some. Do you know what I mean?
I've gotten a fair number of quotes that are like quantity plus or minus 5%. Like they don't promise
that's what I want.
A given quantity.
And then you just invoice for the quantity you
shipped.
Yeah.
I don't do that. We try and hit it on the head. I think there's a couple things going on here. One is, so we are trying to do the latter of like nail it on the head.
Yeah.
If there's issues, we had this issue with these parts actually that we scrapped. So like they were a lathe blank and that we then gripper loaded on the mill.
Okay.
We'd already switched the lathe over to another part. But I was like, let's just switch it back. We're taking a hit here on a changeover time. But we are trying to be, I'm trying to move towards a direction of not avoiding changeovers. And I think at the moment, that's probably to our detriment.
Right.
Classic.
And long term.
Long term, I think it's good because I think we're all learning a lot about changeovers. And right now we're slow. We are.
That my fear definitely is that pushing it onto the customer. Like there are situations where I think the customer just wouldn't care. They'd be like, great, we're like, whatever.
Yeah.
But it also feels like it would be very easy to then never solve the problem because you've now made it your customer's problem instead of like, oh, we need to paint like 5 more today. That's super annoying. How do we avoid that in the future?
I would care if I'm the customer. Like if I order a 20-foot bar of stock, I want to know that I'm getting 20 feet.
I know.
Not 19.
Well, so for me, I don't think I would ever go under. Well, yeah, that's the question.
That's right. Plus or minus.
Plus or minus. Or is it just plus some? Like for a retailer, if you're getting like 50 straps and instead I ship you 54, does that matter? I mean,
it doesn't matter once. It probably if all of your vendors are doing that.
Right. I mean,
and
it's
they do
annoying.
it repeatedly.
It's certainly annoying. And my fear is that you're sort of pushing off the responsibility in a way that you're not hurting every time you mess it up.
Yeah.
And like have incentive to solve it.
Yeah. I think we're trying to hit it on the head for that reason, to have incentive to solve it. And we're trying to not shy away from changeovers for the knowledge of how to do it. And I think like once we get through a few other sort of big pushes, I think bring like setting a hard goal for our changeover times from like end of one part to proof out of another part is going to be.
Do you log them?
Not right now.
So I got a stopwatch and stuck it next to the machine.
Yeah.
And I started logging them and it was motivating, but also interesting.
Yeah.
And just the act of going like, I'm timing this. Somehow your brain is like, all right, we're on the clock. Like of course you're on the clock the whole day, but you're like, and then we made, step 1 of like Shigeo Shingo's SMED is just separating between internal and external. Yeah. And we cut our times in half just by like blowing off stuff that's going to be mounted. I don't know.
Right.
Funny little stuff. And that was like a lot of that was driven by timing.
Yeah. I think we're doing that.
That's very cool.
We're not doing any of that. Well, no. We have done some work to make internal, external, but we have not as a group in the shop been like, we're going to tackle changeovers and get them down to 20 minutes or something across the board.
Yeah.
And make that kind of like priority 1 for a while until it becomes.
There's so many priority 1s is the problem.
It's true.
Priority 1A.
I don't know if that was helpful, but
yeah.
How do we get on that again?
Oh, I was sort of asking about shirking my responsibilities as a business. Anyway, last one here is...
if you bought 2 MacBooks... if you bought one...
They shipped you 2.
They shipped you 2 and charged you for both. You'd be like, excuse me?
Yeah, sure. But if you're buying,
I guess that's more than plus or minus 5%.
It sure is. 5% would be more annoying, I would say. 5% of a MacBook.
Here's a corner of an extra screen.
Let me charge you for it. Last one, I have a Logitech mouse.
Yeah.
And I downloaded the customization software for it.
Okay.
And started messing around with, and you can do application specific programming. on them.
So like if you have
in Fusion, I added one that is like my line tool and another one that's the escape button, which I didn't find useful. Yeah. Anyway, the point is I downloaded it to try to start playing with it because I think there's a lot of efficiency to be gained there.
Yeah.
And I'm just not using them at all right now. We'll see if it's very fruitful. I suspect it could be. But it also raises a sort of this question of standardized versus non-standardized, and like optimization sometimes flies in the face of standardization, or like local optimization flies in the face of standardization. Standardization is often better for global optimization.
Yeah.
As an example, I was watching a Fusion 360 tutorial from Lars like years ago, and he showed all the shortcuts he set up on his keyboard for Fusion. Like you can set up custom shortcuts.
Yeah.
They're much more ergonomic, so you don't have to move your left hand. But suddenly when like Sam opens Fusion and is like, hey, can you help me with this? I'm like, thrashing in the water suddenly. Like, I'm like clicking buttons and it's like, why isn't this working? And so it's non-standard.
Well, you can make it a standard, right?
We could make it a standard in our shop. But so Feynman has a funny book, a funny story, and surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman. Great book if you haven't read it. Where he basically was like, these math symbols make no sense because they're totally non-intuitive. Like you could come up with things that looking at them, you would have an idea of what they're doing. So he came up with all of his own math symbols and started doing math, and then wanted to ask someone for help on his math. You can see where this is going, right? So, and he was like, okay, I see the reason to use everyone else's. So it feels like that. Like it might be better, but it also could be worse simultaneously.
Probably a middle ground.
Yeah, so I don't think I'm really going to run into that with my personal mouse, but then you jump on someone else's computer and you're like really slow again, and maybe slower. But
you're optimizing for it's again that like optimize for like 80%, right? Like you're going to do more than 80% on your computer.
That's the thing to think about.
And looking like a fool for like 5 minutes when you go try.
Like 3 times a year.
Yeah.
It's
probably less than that, really.
That's a good point. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so solve for 80%.
Yeah. I think that's
100% of the time.
80% of the time.
Never do anything on principle.
Solve for 80% of the time. Does that become like an infinity?
That's a good
loop?
question.
Yeah.
We'll get back with the answer next week. No.
80% of the answer.
Yeah, thanks all for listening.
Yep.
You can find me at austere_manufacturing on Instagram and austeremfg.com on the internet.
You can find me at lichen_mfg on Instagram, likenprecision.com on the internet, and the pod at incrementalci on Instagram.
Indeed.
We have a Patreon.
Sure do.
Patronize us.
Please. And we'll be back next week.
Talk to you soon.